So what I'm going to do, first thing we're going to work on is how do you identify what type of passage it is? Because if you're going to do strategy 1, we said you want to identify whatever your weakest passage type is, and you want to do that one last. If you're running out of time, you don't want to invest a lot of time in a certain passage type that you struggle with anyway. So how do you identify what type of passage it is? So this first passage we already identified on your Scantron. This is a data rep, okay? So how do you determine whether or not it is a data rep? Very, very basic. If you look at it quickly, it's just data presented in different forms over one specific study. Okay, so this says passage 1, a study. That's the key term, okay? A study. So it's not multiple things that we're looking at here. It's only one thing, a study. They're just giving you that data in different forms here. So whenever you see that, that immediately tells you this is a data rep. Now, as we go through these practices again, and you look at them, one of the things that you want to do is you'll want to identify, do you have a strong passage type, one that you do really, really well? If so, those are the ones that you want to answer first. If going through this whole process, you say, I'm not good at any of them, or I'm about the same on all of them, then it really doesn't matter if you do this. For me personally, data rep is my best, experiment's my second, and conflicting viewpoints is my worst. So for me, the first thing I do is I take the test and I quickly look at it and say, all right, passage 1, what type is it? A study. This is a data rep. I'm going to jump on it right now and do it. Okay? Everybody good there? All right. Let's talk about other key things within this that we talked about strategy-wise. One of the things we mentioned in science strategies is don't get hung up on technical terms. Okay? So let's look real quick here at this, for example, question 2. Suppose a company wants to use food as bait in a trap designed to capture female bee Germanica. Okay, what's female bee Germanica? Well, you can go back in here and you can look through all this and you can highlight right here it is, female bee Germanica. Okay, so still not, female Blatella germanica, what is it? It's a cockroach. Okay. How important is this female bee germanica in the context of everything? None. None. It's a cockroach. They could call it whatever. Plywood, plank, stick, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's just something designed for this particular test to get you off task, to try to get you focused on things that are not important. The biggest aspect of this test that you have got to learn is, how do I get rid of all that garbage? How do I focus on exactly what's going to happen? So let's look at this first question. It says, according to figure 1. Now that's important because this is called a look it up question. How does it look it up? It tells me exactly where to go. According to figure 1, the mass of cheese remaining at 4 hours was closest to which of the following values? Okay, here's figure 1. Right over here on the side is mass. Where is cheese? Cheese is this one right here. That's called a scale, a key, a table. Okay, lots of different terminology. At 4 hours, where's 4 hours? Here's hours, there's 4. Here's cheese, this one right here. Where's that at? $185. It's just a little above 180. That is a look it up question. That is very direct. It says, go here, here's this, find the answer. Now, that's relatively easy if there are a couple things you know how to do. You know how to read a table, graph, or chart. Okay? For hours, there's our hours on the x-axis. Mass is our y-axis. Use our key to identify cheese as the open block, and then just go find it. Yes?
On our chart, like the cheese and ham one on the key is like the exact same. Like it's not like shaded a little bit darker, so that's why I missed it. Now it's like later.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I just use the order of the key compared.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So yeah, so on yours, that didn't show up quite as dark on the copy. I understand what you're saying. But yes, the order of the key is also the order in the graph itself. So cat, cheese, ham, peanuts. Okay. And typically, you won't have that issue on a real ACT. Obviously, this is a real ACT that's been shared, so we have to print it and then copy it and all that kind of stuff. But I understand your point there. I understand your point. All right, so look it up. It tells you where to go. Being able to analyze, read charts, graphs, tables, and we'll come back to some of these questions. The other thing I want to point out in this particular one is what I said earlier. With science, progression equals difficulty. In math, that was very easy. Like question 1 is going to be a whole lot easier than question 57 in theory. The same is true on the science section within each passage. So this particular passage had how many questions with it? Was it 6? Yeah, it had 6 questions with it. Questions 1 and 2 are going to be easier than questions 5 and 6. So when you get to questions 5 and 6, they're going to be a little bit harder. Okay? They're going to be a little bit harder. So progression equals difficulty within the science test. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next passage because, again, I want us to be able to look and say, how do we identify the passage types? Because if you're going to apply strategy 1, you need to be able to do that quickly. So passage 2. This one was called conflicting viewpoints. Okay, the key term being viewpoints. Okay, multiple people with a viewpoint on this particular thing. So how do I quickly identify that? Student 1, student 2, student 3, student 4. Multiple people have viewpoints. So you can look at a passage real quick and say, oh, this is a conflicting viewpoint passage. Now, how many of those, again, are going to be on a science test? Only one. There's only going to be one conflicting viewpoints. So in this particular one, questions, 7 through 13, if you did really well on that, that's good. What you are is you're probably a good reader. You're a good reader that remembers stuff. Now, one of the things, it may not say student, it may say what? Person. Scientist. It may say hypothesis. Okay? Lots of different terminology, but it's a comparison of things. Now, for me, specifically, I struggle with this. I'm a bad reader, and I don't remember. I'm one of those, when I read a page, I'm nodding off by the time I get to the bottom, and then I have to go back and reread it because I completely forgot what I just looked at. That is me. So these are not very good for me. So how do I deal with that? I do strategy 1. This is going to be the last passage I would do on the science test. For me. I'm going to do all the others. Whatever time's left, I'll do this one. I'll focus on this one. Now, one of the things I mentioned with this is I focus on questions that deal with one person. For example, question number 7 only deals with student 1. Why is that important? I don't have to read everybody else's stuff. I can just focus on student one's opinion to be able to answer that question. Everybody understand what I mean? Okay. Not only that, let's go ahead and go to the next page. Let me skip ahead here. If I'm really struggling with this and I'm trying to focus, then I'm looking to see which question or which person focuses the most as far as number of questions. Okay? So I didn't say that very well. Let me say that again. So question 7 focused on student 1. Question 8 focuses on student 3. Okay? One person again. Question 9 doesn't really say. Question 10, you have to know what? All of them, because it mentions all of them in the answer choices. Question 11, you got to know 2, 3, 4. Okay? Question 12, what do you got to know? 2 and 4. Question 13, I don't know, it doesn't really mention, it's other stuff, right? So this particular conflicting viewpoint, most of them you got to compare multiple people. So for me, I would focus probably on question 7 and 8. 1, it deals with one person, and 2, what did we just get through saying? Progression equals difficulty. The further you go through, the harder it's going to get, the questions are going to get. So those are the first 2 questions. I would probably focus on those, and then if I'm completely out of time, I'm just going to pick my letter of the day for the rest of them. Everybody good? Now, that's not everybody's strategy. Just trying to explain to you to understand how these kind of work. Okay, that's how you identify conflicting viewpoints. Let's go to the next passage. So we've already labeled this one, but what did we call this one? What kind of passage type is this one? It's experiment. Okay, now, experiment is going to be labeled experiment. Not only that, it's more than one. Okay? So what is different from a data rep question and an experiment question or a passage? A data rep is one study where they represent the data in multiple forms. Experiment is they're doing an experiment, but you do multiple experiments. So when you do a different experiment, what do you typically do?
Testing for different things.
You're testing for different things. So you're going to change things in it. So just real quickly, I want you to look at the table in figure 1 for experiment 1, and then look at the figure 2 for experiment 2, and see if you could tell me what's different in the 2 figures. What can you identify as different?
Temperature and mass.
There you go. The y-axis in both is still volume of gas. But on the x-axis in figure 1, it's mass, and on the x-axis in figure 2, it's temperature. So in one experiment, they're changing mass, and the other experiment, they're changing temperature. It's still data representation, but there are changes. Sometimes the questions are going to deal with one experiment. Other times they're going to deal with comparisons. Okay, comparisons. So sometimes you've got to be able to analyze both. So let's look at the questions here for this one. So question 14, the volume of gas collected in trial and experiment 2 for nickel. We'll talk about that later. The same approximate volume of gas was collected in the trial and experiment 1 for what mass of nickel? So there you're having to look at both. You're having to make a comparison. Look at the table in 1, experiment 1 or 2, and then you got to go to experiment 1. It's a little bit more difficult than data rep, but it's still analyzing data. It's just for multiple things. So again, identify your strengths, your passage types. You need to be able to do this. You need to be able to go through it relatively quickly, okay? So let's look at the next passage. I know y'all have already seen the answers, but just at a quick glance, what do you think this one is? Is this data rep, experiment, or conflicting viewpoints? This is what?
It's like data and experiment.
Yeah, this is data rep. This is data rep. This is not experiment. Okay? You have multiple figures, but it's over one thing. Okay? It's over one thing. Go to the next passage, passage 5. What is this one? Do what? This is also a data rep. Okay, again, says study, singular, one thing. You have multiple tables, but it's a study. It's one thing with different representations. Okay, and then the last one. This would be experiment. Now, they didn't call it experiment, they called it study 1, study 2, but it's two different studies. It's not a singular study with different representations. They're different studies and then have the representations. The other thing you may notice as you continue going through, they start adding more pictures and different things like that. A lot of times you're going to find that those pictures, again, are just technical things to try to get you confused, try to get you off base a little bit. So one of the first things you want to do with your science test, once you identify if you're going to do strategy 1 or strategy 2, if you're doing strategy 1 and you're doing passage types in a particular order, the first thing you need to do is get your test, go through very quickly, and say, write down. I need to do, if I'm doing data rep for this one, that means I need to do passage 1, passage 4, and passage 5 first. I'm going to do a lot of skipping. Also, just re-emphasize the fact that if you skip questions, where should you mark it?
On the test booklet and the Scantron.
There you go, the test booklet and the Scantron. That way you don't get off on your Scantron and fill in bubble answers that you shouldn't. Mark them in both. Okay, mark them in both. Where should our emphasis be within each passage? Really focus on which questions? The first ones, right. Because they're going to be typically the what? Easiest. Okay, so let's do that with your test right now. Okay, we broke it down initially. Here's what I want you to do. Take like passage 1. That was questions 1 through 6. Okay, 1 through 6. So if you look on your Scantron, questions 1 through 6, nobody probably got them all, but maybe you did. But if you didn't, how many of you that missed question either 4, 5, or 6? Okay, why again? Because they get harder as you go through. If you take the next one, conflicting viewpoints, which were questions 7 through 13. Okay, 7 through 13. Probably the same thing, unless you're like me, and I'm just a terrible, terrible reader, and I could just miss anywhere in there, okay? But if you miss them, you probably miss like 11, 12, 13. Everybody understand what I'm talking about here? So one of the things that we'll do tomorrow is we're going to take this test, and we're going to talk about how do you actually break down the questions? How do you look for answers? How do you eliminate choices? How do you make some of those harder questions a little bit easier? And honestly, this is not like math where, you know, as you learn new math skills, you start getting better at it. The only way to get better at the science test is you just got to practice. You got to see different ones, you got to practice it. It's not like you're gaining a new skill. It's just reinforcing the strengths that you have for the skills that you've already acquired up to this point. And it's just practice and practice and practice. That's really about the only way you get better at it. Any questions on how to identify the passage types? We all good there? Did everybody get the answer key? Everybody good on that? Okay, so tomorrow, again, we're gonna break down the particular questions. We're gonna talk about how to do all that stuff with the question types itself. Alright, that's it, that's all I've got for you. Okay.